I can't gatekeep this recipe. It's so good, and the key is brown butter. So let's get started. You'll want to cube your butter and pop it into a cold pan. Heat the butter on a high temperature until it melts and then lower the temperature. This is really important because brown butter can burn quite quickly. So high temperature, lower it, and make sure that you're stirring it regularly. And at first you're going to see large bubbles, but they're going to get smaller as it cooks. And then just turn it off once it's brown. I prefer to pour this into another container so it cools down quicker. But if you don't want to do that, you can pop your saucepan into an ice bath and it's going to cool down the edge so that your butter cools down quickly. You can't use this straight away when it's still really hot because it's going to cook your eggs. In a large bowl, mix your brown and white sugar with your cooled brown butter. And I'm using a whisk because I find it the most effective, but you could use a wooden spoon or a spatula. And you just mix it until it's really well combined and the colour is lightened a little bit. Then I add my egg and I do the same. I'm looking for it to be really light and start to get a little more silky. And then I'm adding some vanilla extract. You could add any flavour you want to. Almond might work, caramel, mint, whatever you want. And we're going to keep mixing and it should end up really light and silky. Add in your flour, baking powder, baking soda, and a pinch of salt. I'm using a gluten-free flour blend, but this does work with wheat flour as well. And you'll just want to stir it until you can't see any of the flour left, but you don't really want to over mix it at this stage because we're going to add our chocolate chips and we're going to keep mixing. In this recipe, I use 150 grams of dark and milk chocolate chips and 100 grams of chopped chocolate bar. This is just because the chocolate chips hold their shape, but the chocolate chunks that I make from chopping up a bar, they melt in. And I don't add all of those chunks at once. I add all of the chocolate chips and half of the chopped chocolate, and I'll add the other half of the chopped chocolate on top once it's done. So once you've chilled the dough, I pop it out onto a lined baking tray and these spread, so be sure to leave plenty of space between each one. And then I add the chocolate chunks on top. These just add to the aesthetic of it once they come out and they just melt really well. I've preheated my oven to 180. You'll want to pop these in the oven, keep an eye on it, but I find they take about 10 minutes, but they might take more or less depending on the strength of your oven. And then you'll want to make sure you leave them on the baking tray for at least 10 minutes before you try and move them. I just love these cookies. They're so good, so I hope you give them a try.